Okay, great. I think it's working now. Bismillah. Maybe not, but that's fine. We'll just go with what we have. So again, just to understand, why we're doing this is a lot of the times our interactions with people in the convert community become quite limited. We find ourselves in a place where we see people who are interested in Islam, they're exploring Islam, but there's not always so many spaces that are created that allow for that genuine exploration. And so, as a principle, to be able to really learn about demographics and individuals by actually hearing from them and broadening our own perspectives by listening to the personal narratives of those that we might see quite often day to day, but don't really get to the depth of what their experiences are like, because so much of what we understand somebody's life to be is based off of assumption rather than real interaction. And so for our panelists who are going to be speaking, I'd say that tonight it shouldn't be about you necessarily holding things back, but really allowing for us to benefit from your perspectives and experiences by sharing as much as you can that you feel comfortable with, so that as many of us as possible who are in the room can really understand experientially what the convert experience is like for those who enter into the Muslim community at a later point in their life, and to be able to also find a little bit of ourselves in your stories. And again, just to reiterate, as people are talking, let them feel as if you're actually listening to them, right? That you're giving them your attention and you're letting them feel as if they've been heard. If you hear something that you disagree with, it's not really about jumping to correct or to point out, but to understand that we are in a space that is quite diverse and people who are here are quite diverse, and the goal is to not negate someone's experiences, but to just understand through their experiences. So to start off, I was hoping that each one of you could share a little bit about why you made the decision to become Muslim and what that was like for you. You can feel free to start and whatever.
Ladies first.
And if you could also just, tell us a little bit about yourselves, your name, just so people can get acquainted with who you are. And when you're talking, if you could just tell us your names, a little bit about yourselves in that introduction, and if you try to enunciate so that your voice is kind of carried through the room, that would be great.
All right, I should probably start. My name is Georgia. Right now I run the Conversations initiative here at ICNYU, which is the group that is sponsoring this whole week, which is Converts Week. It's also known as Coverts Week, if you read our typo email this afternoon. Yeah, exactly. That's I've been doing the Converts group for maybe 9 months now, since sort of like last Ramadan, and I took my shahada here 2.5 years ago. I'm losing track already. 2.5 years ago. And I'm an elementary school music teacher. I graduated from NYU in 2013. I wasn't really part of the IC at the time, but I was kind of like lurking in the background and sort of in semi-denial about why I was interested in coming here, but everyone was really nice to me anyway, even though I was like the awkward white girl in the back who like nobody knew, and even though like there was all those reports of the NYPD spying on everybody, they didn't like think I was a spy. Would have made a really bad spy. I'm very easy to read, so that's sort of what I do here. And as for what brought me to Islam, I feel like I get asked this question a lot, and every time I try to answer it differently, and it never comes out the way that I want it to, because I mean it was it was a process, obviously, and it took 5 years of my life more or less, and and you know, it wasn't like it was a constant presence. It sort of like came and went, and I came here and everyone was nice to me, and I was like, oh, that's nice. And then I went and taught in Jordan. I taught English at King's Academy, and that was great, and I was living in a Muslim country, but that didn't mean that I suddenly wanted to become Muslim. And then like it just, you know, you would have moments where you felt really connected to like a higher power, and then there would be moments where you were like, that was weird, I don't know what happened there, let me just go back to my life. So but I guess it was sort of it was a build up of a lot of moments where I felt like some sort of like emotion or connection that went beyond like the immediate situation I was in and became something much more than that. So like I would have a fight with my roommate, who was my best friend, and you know, we wouldn't really resolve the fight, but we would still like hug each other before bed, and I would feel really like grateful that that friendship was like still intact, even though we were mad at each other at the time. And then I would feel like this enormous like sort of sense of like love and gratitude that was like way bigger than anything that could come from a fight with my friend, and that seemed to me like it was coming from Allah, or at least what I sort of later came to call Allah. I didn't really think I called it that at the time, but that was like the first time that I felt like drawn to pray, to like thank someone thing for that that relationship and that love. So stuff like that kept happening to me. And eventually, I was in Brazil on a farm in the middle of nowhere for hard to explain reasons. And there was, it's complicated. I was sitting out in the garden really early in the morning, and I was just thinking about like what I wanted out of life and my relationship with spirituality and all these things. And the old man who owned the farm came out and was like, are you okay? Do you need anything? And I said, no, I'm fine, you know, I'm just like thinking. And he said, okay, well, if you need anything, like, just let me know. And he kind of patted me on the head and like went back inside. And again, I had that feeling of like, I was so happy that this man that didn't know me was just sort of giving this like unsolicited kindness. And then I felt like there was this much larger source of like completely unsolicited, like unconditional love that was a tiny piece of, and that was the moment that I decided to like come home. 2 years ago, I want to convert. So, yeah.
And there was a Brazilian guy who converted this.
Oh yeah, that was I've never actually made that connection. There was the day I took Shahada, there was another Brazilian man, not the farmer dude, who showed up and sort of out of nowhere and took Shahada on the same day as me, and then disappeared and we never saw him again. Presumably went back to Brazil. But I never made that connection before. That's random. Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
Signs everywhere.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name's Cassie. I just moved here from Boston in mid-December. That's where I completed my undergraduate studies. So I'm now in New York on an internship doing furniture restoration in Astoria. And inshallah, I do want to come to NYU for conservation of also furniture. So inshallah, I'm working on that right now. I'm kind of with Georgia on this, like, seems to be the most common question asked. And usually when someone asks me this question, I try to kind of put their question in perspective. I just kind of want to get this out as well. I don't really like it when people who don't know me very much ask such a personal thing. Because as Georgia says, it's a process. It takes many people many years to go through this, and various life experiences can influence it or make you go this way and that way. Eventually, alhamdulillah, we come to the deen. So I just want to have that be known, because I've met a lot of converts who have my similar opinion, so it should be kind of a thing that you ask before you actually ask the question.
We just met on the train platform and I don't know your name.
Yes, that is
not a good time to ask that question.
Not a good time. But I think my journey to Islam was more it came unexpectedly once for me. For a long time in high school, I was on this like big reading a lot. I was looking a lot because I really didn't feel like I was connecting with what I had known in growing up in a Latino household. Because we moved a lot, so we didn't really go to one consistent church, and it wasn't necessarily something we talked about all the time either. So there was like this huge disconnect with me and like my understanding of what religion was and practices were. So I just kind of took it onto myself to be like, okay, this doesn't make sense to me right now. What can I do to make this make sense to me? And that just led me to learning about a whole lot of other religions. And to be quite honest with you, I never even considered Islam as an option because I, at the time, was in Georgia, the state, not the country. So that's in the Bible Belt, guys. Like what is a Muslim there? And like literally, I had no experience or even like representation of Muslims and Islam, except for the news, astaghfirullah, but alhamdulillah, I was too young to really make too many connections about that anyways. So I went throughout high school reading all these various books, asking different people who were really just different, is it sects in Christianity? Like different denominations, that's the word, denominations of Christianity, because like I said, this is the Bible Belt, so like the diversity in religion was Christianity. So I would ask a lot of questions to a lot of my various Christian friends. I even actually had a Hindu friend at one time, so like I got to learn about that. Then I learned about Buddhism for a long time. And then at the end of high school, I was just like, I'm done with this. Nothing clicked. Nothing made sense. I was also a really angry teenager, so I was like, ugh, F all of this. And I just went to college just being like, I am nothing, no one asked me anything. Like I really was torn between like atheist, agnostic. I didn't really know which was making sense to me at the time. But it wasn't until I was plane flight from Georgia to Boston. So I would just stay really watching all that. And for some reason, YouTube kept like suggesting this comedy, Allah Makes Me Funny. I was like, what is those words? I don't recognize those. So it eventually was like recommended enough times to be like, okay, fine, I will like look at it. And upon like watching it, I was like, what is this? And I would like pause it, do some research on another tab, and alhamdulillah. Moment of, oh my gosh, this is everything that I have personally been like believing in for myself, because I was like brought up at a household where we did believe in a God, so like that makes sense for what I was thinking about all through high school and all the practices that I had taken from that and kind of added for myself when I had went past that for my daily practices of my life. I didn't really drink much. I don't know, I never really ate pork anyways. We never pork in the family. But like the general beliefs just stuck with me, and I had what felt like a giant weight lifted off my shoulders at like 3 o'clock in the morning, alone in my room in the middle of Georgia, as I was just like waiting for the time for me to take a van to the airport in Atlanta to go to Boston. I was like, well, this is it now. I think I'm Muslim. And I went straight to school, and the first thing I did after picking up my textbooks was go downstairs in the Barnes & Nobles and pick up a book entitled The Complete Idiot's Guide to Islam. And alhamdulillah, that book has circulated throughout Boston. I don't know where it is now, but I've been practicing Islam now for almost 5 years since then.
Okay. Thank you so much. When do you guys want to?
Want to go next? Sure. My name is Kalma Khalil Pipo. I just celebrated my 3-year anniversary of being Muslim. And just a thing on my name, they always say you do not have to pick an Arabic name or change your mode of dress. However, it kind of it came after the fact. I had gone to Saudi Arabia to work for a year, and before I left New York, I decided that I lived my entire life with an unusual ethnic first name. So, and every time I would tell my name, people would ask me again, and how is that spelled? So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go to Saudi Arabia. I'm going to use an Arabic first name so that nobody asks me that question. And it didn't really work out that way, because when I introduced myself as Khalil, people were like, how can that be your name? So I had to explain the whole thing, so it really didn't help. But I retained it after I became Muslim, because I grew up in the Roman Catholic tradition, and my middle name was given to me when I was baptized into the Catholic Church. And so I kind of felt it was appropriate to kind of put that to the side and put in and keep that name I was using in the Middle East as a symbol of, this new phase of my life. So you can call me whatever you want. Most of my Muslim friends call me Khalil. You can call me Cal. It's okay. I just listening to these stories was really cool, because a lot of the things they said rang true to me, even though our stories are totally different, especially about not having one giant moment, but a lot of little things that added up to it. And I always ask people when they want to know the story. Well, if I can't tell a long story, like if someone stops me that I don't know and said, why did you become Muslim? I just say I was invited. And that's that, and that'll be the end. But that'll be the end of the story. So, so I when people ask me, and I get to tell the long version, I always say, do you believe that God gives you signs? I believe it. I believe that it does happen, because I went to the Middle East for work, and I was in Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's going into Islam Central, and I was a little bit intimidated, but I was really looking forward to it, and it was a very, culture shock was pretty extreme. And I didn't live in a walled compound like a lot of Westerners do. I lived in a regular apartment, and I didn't expect to meet people. I just thought that I would socialize with the people from work, and that would be it. And it was really inexplicable to me that I would just randomly meet people at a coffee house, and they would kind of invite me into the group, and then you get introduced, and friends and within a really short period of time, I found myself surrounded by a group of people who I became really good friends with, and for those who are on the younger side here, as you get older, it's less frequent that you make a new deep friends. You make a lot of acquaintances, but these guys, like they surrounded me like this protective cordon, and there's no proselytizing. So no one ever said to me, here's a pamphlet. Would you like to? Would you consider joining our religion? We never really talked about religion in that sense. I mean, I asked them a lot of questions. Because I was curious, and they were really role models to me, because I experienced Islam as a way of life rather than just a religion that you did on the Sabbath. Like when I was Roman Catholic, we went to church on Sunday, and then for most of the week you didn't even think about it. And here, the entire in Saudi, the entire rhythm of life revolves around the prayer times, and people are very pious but very modern, and they welcomed me with open arms. And I experienced my first Ramadan. I was not a Muslim, and I got just the hospitality and the warmth and I saw Islam as a way of life. And before I went there, I really thought that, I mean, I knew it was going to be a very religious place, so I expected it to be a little oppressive. And I don't mean in the terms of being oppressed, but just, you know, you think of it as such a religious country, and how was I going to feel in that kind of situation? And the thing that struck me almost from the beginning was that I was very comfortable there, and I never felt I never felt oppressive at all. I just felt like I was in this warm sea of Islamic people who welcomed me with open arms, and I asked a lot of questions. I had done some reading, and halfway through, the thought actually had crossed my mind. I mean, I went with my friends to a cultural festival, and there was like a little booth, and the guys in the booth were giving out little cups of Zamzam water, and my friends gave it to me to like, drink this, it's Zamzam water. What's Zamzam water? And I drank it, and then they were all joking like, oh, well, you know, now you're Muslim because you drank it. And towards the end of my year there, I really thought, well, you know, the thoughts I was having, this is just because I'm excited to be here and I have friends, and after I return to New York, it's all going to fade away. And so I returned to New York and, you know, started, you know, commuting back and forth from New Jersey, and that's my, like, quiet time. And every morning I'm on the train coming to work, and it's like this little bell ringing, and, you know, thank God we have these phones, you know, pull up Wikipedia articles and read, and, you know, there's so much online information. And I would read and you know, I would, you know, look up, you know, what does Islam say about Jesus, and I learned things that I never knew, and I would read things and I'm like, well, that's what I've always thought. You know, that makes more sense to me. And I got to a point where, you know, I always felt like I spoke to God, and looked for guidance, and, you know, I basically said, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Because, you know, if you don't know the truth, you can't be held responsible for it. But once you come to the realization that this is the right way, then it's kind of like you're obligated to do it. And at that moment, it was like all of a sudden I could see. It was like in my mind I could see all throughout my life that it was really meant to be, and it was very profoundly. It affected me very deeply, because all of a sudden all these different signs that I had received throughout my life, all of a sudden, like, lit up, like you were seeing like street lights going all down the avenue. When I was 8 years old, we were studying the Middle East, and we picked a country, and everybody wrote a letter to the Consul General in New York. So I wrote a letter to the Saudi consulate, and 2 weeks later, I said, we are studying the Middle East, and I'm 8 years old, and 2 weeks later, I get this little package back, and there were photos and little, all like information about the country. And one of the things that was in there was a picture of the Kaaba, and that was the beginning of it. And I remember just being fascinated by it and wanted to know what it was, and that symbol followed me my entire life. And every time I saw it in a book or on TV or in the newspaper, I was drawn to it, and I remember reading back before they had the internet. Some of you remember. We had these things called encyclopedias, and so I would break it out, and I would read about it. And then Wikipedia came along in my adult life, and I must have read the entry on the Kaaba 100 times. Every time the Hajj was on TV or in the paper, it's like it seemed like no matter where I looked, there it was, and it never really clicked with me. And there were other signs, too, but it was almost like Allah was saying, I'm sending you all these signs, and you're so thick that you're not getting it. So let me take you and plop you in Saudi Arabia, and then maybe you'll get it. Because the night before I had to go to Washington to interview with our headquarters to see if they were gonna send me on this assignment, and I got out of my car, and there in the sky was literally perfect dimensions, was the crescent moon and Venus, but I mean, perfectly set up, like they pulled it right off of a flag. And I was bowled over because I thought that was a sign. I said, oh wow, I'm getting this job. I'm getting this job, and that I did. But then, when I had this kind of epiphany a year later when I was back in New York, then I realized, like, oh, that sign, that had nothing to do with the job. That had to do with, I got you. And it's been very, very personal and very solitary. I didn't talk to people before I made the decision at all. I just read. There's just so much available online. I read and I prayed and I thought about it, and I'm like, is this what I'm supposed to do? And I made the decision completely on my own, kind of knowing that I was going to be, I knew it was going to be kind of a solitary path. And when I told my friends, they said, "Are you sitting down?" I'm texting them, and I said, "Are you sitting down?" They're like, "This is what I'm doing." And they all kind of, they freaked out. I didn't realize that people were going to be so happy. I mean, like shedding tears, happy. I got voice messages from my friends' mothers. Like, I didn't realize that. I did not understand that it was going to be such a joyous thing, and all my friends felt that it was a blessing on them because I told them that they were role models for me, as pious Muslims who showed me how it worked as part of your daily life. And so it wasn't just a blessing on me, but it was a blessing on all of my friends. And shortly thereafter, I was lucky enough to make the Umrah, and my friend in Jeddah who took me in, and I prepared. He got me the garments. I said, make sure you get the largest size possible because I'm not going to fit into skin. This guy was skinny. And we went there, and I was really afraid because I was walking into the Grand Mosque. All of a sudden, I had doubt. Like, did I misinterpret this? Is this all going to be wrong? When I walk through that door, am I going to feel like I belong here, or am I going to go, uh-oh, this is a huge mistake? And my friend we paraded right in, and immediately, I looked at him, I'm like, oh, no. I said, I totally belong here. And we prayed, and then he's like, are you ready? And we walked in to the middle. My whole life I had seen, photos of the Kaaba, and I read about it, and I, in different parts of my life, and I'd never really understood that what that was about. And then all of a sudden, there it is. And I was so overwhelmed that I don't think I could speak. I don't think I could say anything to my friend. And after we finished making tawaf, he kind of helped me maneuver up, and I put my hand on it, and it was like from 8 years old to that point, where all of a sudden, like, all these dots connected, and this thing that I was fascinated with for 45 years, all of a sudden, I had my hands on it, and you could feel that all the Muslims in the world who are praying at that moment, that was all focused on right at that spot, and it's something that I won't ever forget, and it totally just put out any doubts that I had that I was doing the right thing or not. And the only regret I have is that, I kind of wished, like, why didn't that happen, 20, 30 years ago, instead of, I feel like I feel like a child in Islam, but I'm so far ahead in life. What would my life be now if I had, found Islam when I was much younger and had the benefit of it. And so that is my conversion story. The only last piece of that I kind of blew my mind. I made my shahada up at the big mosque up on 95th Street. It was very scary. That's the one that I knew to go to because I had seen it. The imam, we did it before, he wanted me to do it before the service. So we did it up in the front, there's like 700 people there, and he's like, don't look at them, he's like, look at me. And then afterwards he goes, no, go in the back, and I said, well, I don't know how to pray. He goes, just do what everybody else is doing. And then after it was over, people came up to me and, hugs and InshaAllahs and Alhamdulillahs and all this stuff. Hugs, and, it was just, and then here comes the imam with this very distinguished looking gentleman. And he introduced this guy to me, and he goes, hi, I'm Ahmed, I'm the Consul General of Saudi Arabia in New York. And I'm like, so again, it was just like, so here I have again this country, which is the home of Islam, and the beginning was the Consul General at that time giving me a picture of the Kaaba, and then the current Consul General watched me take my Shahada and came up and greeted me. And the whole thing just kind of blew my mind, and I'm really sorry to take so long to tell this story, but it's a long story, and it just that's why when people say, why'd you become a Muslim on the train, I'm like, I was invited. But that's what my friend who took me to Umrah said, because one of the many feelings I had was I told my friend I felt a little guilty, and he goes, well, guilty for what? Because I had this overwhelming feeling that millions of Muslims have lived and died, and on their last breath, they wished that they had been able to go where I was standing, right there at the Kaaba, and I felt like, well, millions of people couldn't get here and can't get here, and so who am I, just this new guy who just became a Muslim like a month ago, and I, stroll off a plane and stroll into Mecca. Like, why do I deserve this blessing? And my friend said to me, he went to school in America, so he's like, dude. Actually, he goes, dude, you were invited, and then from that point forward, I never doubted that I was meant to be Muslim, and better late than never. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. So we're gonna break for Maghrib in a couple of minutes, and we're gonna hear from Sister Karen and Kiara about why or how they came to this faith as well. But I would ask two things. One, for you all to stay after Maghrib, because you can imagine what it is that the conversation is doing for you, just as you hear and kind of reflect upon the narratives and experiences of those that are talking. Two, it's not really the same without everyone's presence. So if you're able to stay until we conclude, that would be great. The other thing that I want you to start thinking about, though, as we go into the second part of the conversation, is usually when we engage converts in the Muslim community, if there is any type of interaction or opportunity to speak, it usually stops right where it is that we've brought the conversation to. Like, we ask people why they became Muslim. We give them a sense of validation because they get to share their voice for the first time, really talk about something. There's impact upon the audience that's hearing it because they are now in a place essentially able to not just hear someone else's story, but to a certain extent legitimize for themselves their own practice of their faith because they see somebody else now embracing it in a certain way. But what we don't do ever in communities pretty much everywhere is ask people after they've converted, well, what was it like the next day? What was it like a week later or a month later? What was your first holiday experience like? What was it like when you were trying to figure out how to pray or how to dress or how to read the Quran? What was it like when you dealt with Muslims for the first time? Beyond that first moment where there was a lot of takbirs and everyone was happy, and then you had to still kind of move forward. And what's critical and what will get the positives as well as some of the discussion that might be a little bit more tough to digest is going to necessitate that all of us are here and present to kind of really listen and understand what the experience is like. So we're going to break for Maghrib. People need to make wudu, and we're going to start the conversation again immediately after we pray our sunnahs. We're going to try to wrap up by 9 o'clock. The people who are watching on the live stream, we're going to start again in about 15-20 minutes, inshallah. Alaikum. When do you guys call the azan?